So, the mayor of Vancouver, Ken Sims, or should I say former mayor of Vancouver, had a plan which was to kick out all the native people from Vancouver. Now, the native population of Vancouver is surprisingly small. The last numbers that I remember were we comprised 2.2% of the population, yet we comprised 38.8% of the homeless population. Now, this is probably why that piece of shit wanted to send us back to our nations. But this desire to dispossess us of the region that we are in should not surprise anybody in Canada, because this has several histories. There was a few recent, more contemporary histories where different provinces sent their Indigenous people and homeless people on a bus to Vancouver. Straight up said, we don't want to deal with them. We're shipping them to the downtown east side. Now that, of course, is 100, 200 years after the other more violent dispossessions, where one or two examples on Vancouver Island where the government evicted people from their land. But these people were resilient and they walked back to their land. I don't know how far they walked, but they made it back to their land. And the government then again dispossessed them. But this time, the government burned their nation to the ground so that they could not go back. So we can look at the more recent examples. We can look at the older history. Either way, it's really painful to see. But we're very fortunate that there was a great backlash and that Ken Sim did not get elected again, and that he was not able to attempt to make this plan work. But this plan, it's integral to talk about a very hard thing, which is that most of us would rather not be in Vancouver. Most of us would rather not be in the city. Most of us would prefer to be in our nation if it were an option. But 4 centuries of dispossession, 4 centuries of the deprivation of our resources, 4 centuries of the colonial bourgeois capitalist democracy that separates power from the masses. 4 centuries of this has made incredibly stark, violent apartheid conditions in our nations. The Indian Act legislates that all resources taken from our people, a percentage needs to be given back to us, and this has never been upheld. Not for the incredible bounty of fish harvested along the entirety of the West Coast, not for the grain, not for the oil, not for the minerals, not for the water, not for the prosperity of the lobster on the East Coast. All of these resources have made Canada so rich, yet our people live in the most concentrated squalor on the continent. Across every reserve in North America, there is an immense housing shortage, where the starkest example is in a nation called Red Lake or Red Deer. I think it's Red Lake in the US. And the average number of people living in one home is 17. Now this, of course, breeds conditions for disease, for unwellness, for unhealthy fabric of their society. And this, of course, pushes us out. The tremendous housing shortage across all of our nations does not afford us an opportunity to live in a harmonious way in our life. We aren't able to escape violent partners. Women aren't able to very easily escape abuse. And this economically pushes them to leave their land, to leave their networks, to leave their families. This is why the process is not just economic, but a political and colonial method to disenfranchise us. I'm making this video from Vietnam because my dad and I butted heads and we argued for 3 years. And after 3 years, he told me my way of life has no place in the family home. And for my politics, I was told to get the fuck out. And now I am 13,000 kilometers away from my nation. And some of the proudest work I ever did in my entire life was in my nation, and I miss it all the time. I worked at the school there as a TA, and it had the starkest conditions of colonialism. There was a 2-week period where it was 12 or 14 suicide attempts from students within the school. That year, our school lost 14 or 15 staff members, including myself and including the 3 psychologists. It was some of the most meaningful work I've ever done, and I really wish that I could continue that work. But the lack of housing, the lack of conditions in our village, the lack of political autonomy has created such an intense colonial hardship. And one day there'll be lots of housing. One day there'll be lots of options. Now, I don't know how many reserves have the same problem. I'm guessing it's a lot, but from what I've seen, all lucrative industry is privatized and monopolized by foreign corporations. And this goes back 400 years. This goes back predecessing the Federation of Canada as a nation state. And what we see, instead of high-paying, meaningless capitalist jobs, which is what we generally see across Canada, which is generally what we see with the tech field or the finance field or all these other big booming popular fields. In contrast, in the village, what we see is the most meaningful work you'll ever do, and it pays so little. In the Celtic Nation, there's a pretty intense split where so many people, they want to work and they can't. They have too much domestic duties and obligations. And the people who suggest that domestic work isn't work are revealing a deeply, deeply misogynist and patriarchal colonial framework that devalues that work. So we see lots of people who don't have domestic supports. There's no state-funded programs like the Soviet Union had to provide state-funded daycare. There's not massive things like that to alleviate the domestic burdens. And then on the other side, what you have is people working so much. You meet so many people with 2 or 3 jobs. Today is a day that commemorates the many thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women, boys, girls, Two-Spirit, and other folks. I've got a little more than 6 hours of theory, of history, of free educationals on these topics. You can message me anytime and I will share these with you. Also, since many people argued with me about this in the past few days and previously, every other year, about elections. And the Canadian elections are no more legitimate than an Israeli election, because these are built on capitalist theft of land and freely allowing corporations to buy off all of the politicians and enable them to commit unspeakable cruelties upon the people. All my relations, please study what I have to share when you have the time.